Well, I think first of all, when I think of athletic scholarships, my first thoughts are those of appreciation because I was the recipient of an athletic scholarship. Long, long time ago, I got a full scholarship at the University of Toledo to play basketball there. And I can remember how appreciative my dad was that his son's education was covered. I had two older brothers, they both got athletic scholarships too. So, I view them as very valuable things. And in Division II versus Division I, there isn't as much athletic scholarship money. Division I is mostly full rides, not always with the Olympic sports, but in Division II, it's much fewer scholarships that are partial scholarships divided amongst everybody in the team, but they're still a valuable thing. They can just certainly help offset the cost of scholarship for a student. And so I've always been a firm believer in athletic scholarships because I think they serve a purpose. For many schools, smaller private schools, they are a driver of enrollment. They help drive enrollment. The partial scholarship model that Division II uses has been proven to be economically the smartest one for schools, and it does attract students, and it does help students out and get their education and retain students as well. It's a big help in retaining students through their college years. So overall, I'm a big believer of athletic scholarships. And I have mixed emotions with respect to a lot of what's going on in Division I right now. Because again, I was a Division I student athlete. I got a full scholarship. I worked in the summertime to make some money, so I had spending money. And I've never bought the argument that these Division I full scholarship student athletes are hurting for money or food to eat. Food to eat seems to be the common thing they like to talk about. And I've never bought that argument. Now, I understand some of those student athletes come from means that are very tough socioeconomically, and therefore perhaps it is difficult for them to do a whole lot. But the value of that education and that scholarship is off the charts in terms of what it can bring to a student to be able to get their education paid for. So overall, I view them as very valuable things. And I guess I understand in Division I why they feel the need to perhaps add more to that scholarship, which they're doing now with the cost of attendance, which has always been a number that's out there. Every university has a cost of attendance, and now a Division I student athlete is allowed to receive that, which is a cash stipend, basically, for whatever it costs for that student to travel to and from the school from his or her hometown, regular costs of attending college, of supplies and general things that a student might need. There's a published number now that they all can receive. Now, they don't all. Every school doesn't have to give it, and some Division I schools are struggling with that because they don't have the dollars to do that. But I understand where it is something that we've progressed to in the Division I world, and generally I'm not opposed to that. It's hard in a world that they're in. Again, this is different from the world Grand Valley and Division II is in. But in the world of Division I, there's so much money involved. And so many people are making so much money, particularly the head coaches of most of the revenue sports, that it's hard to justify how a student athlete can't get a few hundred extra dollars a month when coaches are making millions and becoming wealthy. So that's probably the natural order of things. So that's kind of my overall view of it all. No question about it. There's a wide range in Division I of where their money's come from for their annual budgets, which of their annual budgets, there's really three major areas: scholarships, salaries, and operating budgets. So in Division I, there are perhaps 20 schools that net a profit as we view netting a profit, if you can do that in the education world, which essentially means the revenues they generate pay for all of their expenses, including their scholarships, including their facilities upkeep, including everything. And we're talking about the Power Five conferences, the Big Ten schools, Michigan, Michigan State. There's, and some of those are not self-supporting. Michigan certainly is. They bring in so much revenue. Ohio State, Notre Dame, Florida, Texas, Alabama. You can name the USCs. You can name the biggest ones of them all. Top 20 that come to mind that you see in the top 20 of the AP poll. Those are the schools that are self-supporting. They don't rely at all on any institutional funding. Almost all of the other schools in Division I rely on institutional funding. In the Mid-American Conference, for example, let's take Eastern, Western, Central, almost 80% of their funding comes from institutional funding. It doesn't come from television revenues, gate receipts, licensing, marketing and sponsorships that all the big boys have, and lots of it. The Big Ten Conference annual budgets are about $100 million now. Roughly in that area. I'd say on the average $100 million, okay? The Mid-American Conference annual budgets, Eastern, Western, Central, Toledo, my alma mater, and others, are around $30 million, okay? And they don't generate, they may generate 20% of that on their own, which is $5-6 million on their own, which means $20 to $25 million is being funded by the institution. Now, as a way of comparison, Grand Valley's annual athletics budget is between $11 and $12 million today. But Grand Valley generates over $1 million in gate receipts and sponsorships and fundraising. From a Division II standpoint, that's a lot. Grand Valley generates probably 15% of its own budget through our methods of generating revenue. That's a lot in Division II. And most of the Division I folks, they might be generating 10 to 20% of their budget as well. But 80% or so comes from institutional funding, just like it does for Grand Valley and other Division II schools. The difference is that 80% is a lot more in Division I than it is in Division II. 80% of 30 million is almost 24 million. That means some of the Mid-American Conference institutions are funding their athletics program from, let's say, $24 million of institutional funding, whereas Grand Valley is using 9 or 10 million. All right, and then you ask yourself, who's getting the most bang for their buck? I would argue Grand Valley is. We have teams that are successful. We get just as much exposure as most of these teams in the Mid-American Conference, and we're spending about a third amount, roughly a third of what they're spending. So, it's a philosophical question by institution. And I love to have discussions like this with students at Grand Valley in particular that say, why don't we go Division I? And when you explain that gap in funding, that it's about 3 times as much, that means your tuition is going to jump significantly if Grand Valley were to go from Division II to Division I, because there's no way they're going to make that up in ticket sales and television contracts and sponsorships. There's no way. So that's the differences from Grand Valley Division II, the Mid-American Conference, to the Power Five and the Big Ten Conference. And scholarships are in all of those budgets. So you can see the Big Ten folks pretty much generate enough money on their own to pay for their own athletic scholarships. In Grand Valley, it's not the case. We're institutionally funded, as is the Mid-American Conference schools and the lower levels in Division I, Oakland, IPFW, other schools like that. They're not generating the revenue Grand Valley is generating. And so they rely on institutional funding. First of all, where does the money, who decides on how much money the athletic department as a whole gets? And that varies from institution to institution. Generally, they have some type of governance process. At Grand Valley, there's a budget committee. The budget committee is the ones that they set the tone, or they set the agenda and what the next year's budget will be. The Board of Trustees ultimately passes that budget. But the budget committee, and it's composed of the Finance Administration Office, the Provost Office. I believe the Provost is the chair of that committee, and various people from all sectors of the university, from the academic side, of course, and from all the staff and auxiliary services like athletics, facilities, housing, human resources, all these other areas are parts of the institution. And somebody's got to determine how much money goes and where does it go. So at Grand Valley, it's a budget committee that says athletics, you're going to get this amount of money. Now, then it's up to the athletics department, the athletics director, to determine where that goes within the athletics department. Now, you make a budget request, and certainly you separate out scholarships from operating budgets. So if the athletic department of Grand Valley were to receive an increase of 2% in operating budgets, that's an amount of money that the athletic director has at his or her discretion to disperse among 20 varsity sports plus other areas. You've got athletic training, you've got sports information, you've got game operations, you've got student wages to worry about and help, and so on. So generally, that's spread out. Whatever that amount of money is spread out amongst all the various budgets you have in the athletic department, which I believe there were 20 different accounts that I was responsible for as athletics director. Now that means you've got 20 sports, but track and field is really 6 sports: men and women's cross, men and women's indoor track, men and women's outdoor track. But that's one budget, track. Okay, so you had your sports budget, each of them in their own budget, and then you had sports information, athletic training, game operations, cheerleaders, marketing and promotions, ticket account. And those are all important budgets. I mean, you get to a certain point when you have, an athletic training, for example, the cost of tape goes up. The cost of those modalities goes up. You've got to figure out a way to be able to help all those operating expenses out. And by the same token, Grand Valley in Division II, the scholarship budget is a part of the university scholarship budget. So the financial aid office, the athletics directors say we'd like to have more scholarships in such and such a sport. The budget committee would approve that, but that increases the budget within the athletic scholarship budget, which is encompassed within the financial aid office.
Okay.
So I think the overall answer to your question, every school has a budget committee or some governing body that says this is how much your department will get. Then it's the head of that unit, which in the case of athletics, an athletics director, who decides, I'm going to spread this amount amongst all the sports. And that, of course, there's a lot of variables that go into play with that. You mentioned football. Football, of course, is big, but football has a lot of bodies. It's an expensive sport. You've got 100 student athletes, you got 10 coaches, you've got, there's a lot of tape that's consumed in football, all right? There's a lot of injuries, there's a lot of, your health care is in that area. But you also have to be concerned with Title IX and making sure your women's sports are being treated fairly. And I think we always did that at Grand Valley, and witness a great success of our women's athletics programs is one reason for that. So that, was funding is hard in intercollegiate athletics. It's hard everywhere, and even those that have all the money, like in Michigan or Ohio State, will say it's hard because they have great expenses. On the other hand, the revenue potential they have is tremendous. And then at all the other levels, when you rely on institutional funding, the challenge comes in when the university has to cut back. We experienced that in Michigan, about 6, 7, 8 years ago when we had the recession and funding from the state dropped. Well, we all had to take a good hard look at everything we were doing and how we can maintain our budgets and maintain our operations at the level at which we have them. And those are always challenges, of course. And I think politically, athletics needs to cut whenever the rest of the campus has to cut. The biggest challenges is in the area of scholarships. Because even if the university is cutting operation budgets, cost of scholarship is going to go up. Your cost of your tuition keeps going up, right? You get the bill for that. Well, scholarship involves tuition, room and board, and loan of books. When tuition goes up 3%, your scholarship budget goes up 3%. When room and board goes up 2%, your scholarship budget goes up accordingly. So that budget keeps getting bigger. And that's the challenge for those schools at the major level that are generating their own revenue. They have, Michigan has probably 400 or 500 full rides throughout their department at whatever it is now in Michigan, 50, 60,000 a year. Do the math. That's an expensive deal. So, if you have 50,000 times 500, your scholarship budget is what, 50 million, and that goes up 2%. It's a lot. It's a lot of money. So that's always the challenge of an intercollegiate athletics budget, because salaries you can control to some extent. You have to continue to increase your salary if you want to keep good talent. Operating budgets are also under your control. You can decide not to get new uniforms. You can decide not to take a long trip that year, that sort of thing. But the scholarship budget is a tough one, because that one you don't have much control over. The budget committee and the board of trustees set the percent increase of tuition, room, and board. When that goes up, scholarship budget